But firstly, let's talk about malaria. We could completely eradicate that disease in one generation, we're now told. It's one of the oldest and deadliest diseases to affect humanity, with 200 million cases recorded worldwide every year. And it's caused by a tiny parasite carried by a mosquito. It causes flu-like symptoms and can be fatal if left untreated. The World Health Organization has said that with the right preventative measures and better treatment, the world could be completely malaria-free by 2050. But until it's eradicated, anyone travelling to an at-risk area, including Africa, Asia, parts of Central and South America and so on, is prescribed what are called anti-malarials, pill, whatever, preventative medication taken before, during and after your trip. Now, one anti-malarial, known as mefloquine, or more popularly Lariam, can cause psychosis. Just last month, we heard the tragic story of Alana Cutland, the 19-year-old Cambridge student who died after falling from a plane above Madagascar. It's thought she jumped to her death, and there have been some reports saying she may have been suffering from psychosis caused by her anti-malarial drugs. We shall see. There have been reports of other anti-malarials causing hallucinations and anxiety. So should you be worried about taking them? And is it worth it? If you don't take them, you don't risk psychosis, but then you do risk malaria. 08000 288 291, email vine@bbc.co.uk. We say hello to Dr. Sarah Jarvis. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I've taken Lariam myself, I should say.
Have you?
Yes, I have. I took it as an Africa correspondent. I took it daily for 3 years.
Was that a wee while ago?
Yeah, it was at the end of the 90s. And because we were always travelling with no notice and you have to have a residue in your system,
yeah,
I took it.
So that would have been weekly. Mefloquine is weekly.
Let's just think. Yes, weekly.
Malarone is daily.
That's right,
it's confusing.
weekly.
They've got similar names completely.
No, you're right. It was weekly. And I would say two things about it. Mm-hmm. One is that on a particular trip to Sudan, there were 4 of us. We had nowhere to sleep. We had nets, but we couldn't use them because obviously they need to be hung above you. So we slept outside, under the stars. The other 3 all got malaria and I didn't.
Yeah,
right?
These things are very effective. And let's make no mistake, malaria can kill. Now, we know we have made good progress. So we know the number of countries who've got malaria has fallen from 106 to 86. Cases have fallen by about 35%. Death rates fallen by about 60% in the last 20 years alone. But unfortunately, so far, most of that is because of, as you say, nets and better drugs for preventing people getting it and better drugs for treating it. But there is still a long way to go. We'd have to use some really smart technology to get rid of it completely. And in the meantime, you've got to take anti-malarials.
So, because there are different types, because the people I knew who got malaria they seemed to just have a very severe flu. They pushed it back with drugs and they now get reoccurrences occasionally of what is a flu-like thing. And that's livable with.
It is, but there is a particular variety called falciparum malaria, and that is usually found in Africa. It's a particularly nasty one, and it can cause swelling of your brain. It can be fatal. It's sometimes known as black water fever because your urine, basically your kidneys just get dissolved from the inside out. You're peeing raw blood. It can kind of dissolve you from the inside out. It is a horrible condition. And of course, a lot of people in Africa haven't got access to quick treatment.
No. So that is from the mosquito, the parasite inside the mosquito, which goes into the body and does what?
Effectively, it infests the cells. It gets into your red blood cells and infests them.
And what is if we talk about Lariam here as one of the proper sledgehammer preventions, what is that doing? How does it stop it?
It's stopping the parasite. It's not the mosquito itself, it's the parasites that they carry, and it's stopping those parasites from being able to invade your system.
So I mentioned that when I had 2 things to say about it. One was that I didn't get malaria, and the other one was that once I dreamt there was a giant spider on my bedroom ceiling, and when I opened my eyes and woke up, the spider was there, and it was 6 foot wide.
Okay.
So that's the one moment I had a hallucination, and I remember thinking, this is Lariam.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't think there's any doubt that it was. This is very common, and we now have very strict warnings for people taking Lariam or mefloquine. There are alternatives. When I was a girl, Lariam was quite new, and we didn't have Malarone, which is a combination of 2 drugs which you take every day. So people who are going to areas where falciparum malaria was a problem, so chloroquine and proguanil, which is the old-fashioned version we all used to get, doesn't work for those areas. They would have to take mefloquine. Now, we used to say you you take one tablet before you go to get it into your system. As you said, you take it the whole time you're there and you take it for 4 weeks after you come back. However, with mefloquine, we now recommend that people take it for 2 to 3 weeks before they go, so that they can see whether they are likely to get any of these psychiatric reactions.
Okay. Sally's on the line from Lincoln. Hi, Sally.
Hi there.
So you were like me, you took Lariam in the mid-90s. What happened to you?
I did. That was about 1994. We went out to Belize and I basically had to be flown back. I just thought I was going completely mad, utter panic. Couldn't breathe, couldn't drink, couldn't eat, couldn't anything. And to cut a very, very long, 10-year long story short, I then got home and was treated by a psychiatrist. I thought I was just a raving lunatic. Panic attacks. Had a 2-year-old to look after, and it was an absolute nightmare. And then, obviously, the drugs that the psychiatrist gave me, because Lariam wasn't considered in those days. So you just come back and you just, who are you? So treated by a psychiatrist, treated with talking therapies, which all made me worse because everybody was looking for what was wrong with me. And years later, when it all did sort itself out, because then I was on antidepressants and all the rest of it, but I got to the bottom of it, understand what had gone on, and actually by age 40, sort of 7 years later, I retrained as a psychotherapist because I knew what it felt like to have panic attacks.
Gosh.
Wow.
And I could then help people the other way around. So I'm now in my late 50s, but my speciality has been panic disorders, anxiety disorders, depression and suicidal tendencies. So it actually turned the other way for me in the end, but it destroyed years.
Did it? So did you stop taking the Lariam and did that stop the panic or not?
No. This is what was so extraordinary. It was, you take the Lariam as you do when you go, and I can't remember how I took it because it's too many years ago. And then you do what you do while you're away. And then when I was away, that's when it hit, while I was away. So then I didn't continue it. But obviously the psychosis, whatever was going on, was still in me. And I get back home to the UK, a gibbering idiot. And so you go and see a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist then just put me on an antipsychotic drug.
Did the psychiatrist ever say the word Lariam to you?
No, not at all.
Sarah, in those days,
I really hope we know a lot more about it.
Yeah.
Sally, you've described some classic symptoms there. It's very interesting because I did say that some of the other anti-malarials have been associated. And if you look at what are called the summary of product characteristics, the SPC, then if we look at Malarone, it's got uncommon anxiety, rare hallucinations, common abnormal dreams and depression, and unknown frequency panic attacks, crying, nightmares, psychotic disorder. Mefloquine is even worse. I mean, very common, which is more than 1 in 10 people get abnormal dreams and insomnia. So Jeremy was in very, very good company. We don't know, interestingly, because they very much list panic attacks, confusional state, suicide, attempted suicide, self-endangering behaviour, bipolar disorder, psychotic disorder, delusional disorder, depersonalisation, mania, schizophreniform disorder.
Tick.
The lot.
Tick.
But we don't know how often they are. We do know it's often enough that these days everybody would absolutely be thinking about it. And I'm delighted that you are one of the ones who managed to turn it to the good.
Thank you very much, Dee. Thank you for your call. And I'm so glad, Sally, you turned that around. Dr. Sarah Jarvis here talking about psychosis caused by malaria medication. Terrible stories about Lariam that we're hearing. However, Sarah, you want to add a rider, which is that there are terrible stories about malaria as well.
There absolutely are. And it's very interesting. You said that when you were with your colleagues and 3 of the 4 of you got malaria, and the others, I think, had decided they were kind of, immune. I've been there for a long time. I haven't had it. It doesn't work that way. An awful lot of people who get malaria, people who are going back, grew up in a country, going back to visit family and friends, it really, nobody is immune, and I would strongly advise anyone who's going to one of these countries, it is a deadly disease.
Okay, if you're going to a country where there is malaria, let's say you're going for 2 weeks, can you just practice bite prevention?
The answer is you can do both. You can reduce your risk, but you absolutely cannot get rid of the risk completely. So these mosquitoes, it's called the Anopheles mosquito, which is the one that tends to carry the Plasmodium, the parasite that causes malaria. And it tends to be more active in the evenings and at night time, as opposed to the one that, say, carries the Zika virus, which is active during the daytime. So yes, by all means, wear long sleeves, wear long trousers, use a knockdown spray, cover yourself with anti-malarial, usually containing containing a mosquito repellent.
A knockdown spray.
Knockdown sprays, spray around the air to get rid of any mosquitoes.
Yeah.
If you're wearing mosquito spray, it ideally should be one that contains DEET. There are other more natural versions, but they don't seem to last as long as the one that contains DEET. Mosquito nets, impregnated, and all the rest of it. They'll all help, but actually it only takes one mosquito.
Okay, Ketlin Bracken emails, my brother started on a course of Lariam before his outback safari adventure in Africa. He had no history of mental illness. After a few days of commencing the drug, our mum said he was making some really strange calls to her. On his second day in Africa, his group leader went to his tent in the morning to wake him, and he was horrified by what he saw. The tent was a bloodbath. My brother was unconscious. It turned out that overnight, Rob had taken his penknife out and in a Lariam-induced psychosis had attacked himself.
Yeah.
Isabel Harrison's on the line from Whitby. Hello, Isabel.
Hello, Jeremy.
Now, your husband took Lariam, is that right?
My husband took Lariam in the late 90s when we lived in South Africa. We realised that there was a problem after one day as he was in the back of a taxi driving down the highway to get to the airport. He tried to convince the taxi driver to stop in the fast lane because he had to get out of the taxi as he was being attacked in his mind by things that he couldn't see in the car.
Right.
The driver ignored him, quite rightly, because you don't get out of taxis anywhere there on the highways. Got him to the airport. He called me and told me what was going on. I read the blurb and realised it was one of the many side effects. So we stopped taking it, went to an alternative. I can't remember what the alternative was.
Well, the good news is that one of the reasons for starting it early is that if you do get these symptoms, they usually happen within a week or two. Yeah. Therefore, I would normally say, they say 10 days before. I probably, if I had to take it, would take it 2 to 3 weeks before, because that way you could start an alternative such as Malarone, which you only need to start 1 to 2 days before you go. But again, you've got to have the protection before you get there. Take it the whole time you're there and continue to take it. In the case of Malarone, for a week after you get back. In the case of Mefloquine, for 4 weeks. But it's great that he caught it, and you were quite right. Well done you for reading the blurb.
Subsequently, my youngest son has travelled to Malawi, very high malarial area, but we took all the precautions. And listening to you about the covering up, knockdown, etc., malaria tablets are still not 100% because one of his doctor colleagues who was out there, she caught malaria and they suspect it's because her liver metastatized it differently, and although she took all the precautions, still caught malaria.
Right, interesting.
It's not 100% guaranteed, you're absolutely right, but it's much more effective than just using the knockdown sprays. And interestingly, malaria symptoms can happen up to a year after you come back, particularly if you've taken part of the course and haven't kept going after you get back.
Thank you, Isabel. Very, very enlightening. Deborah Tilbrook in Uxfield, East Sussex. I think that must be Uckfield.
I think it probably
I don't
is.
think there is an Uxfield with an X. I was born in 1946 and lived in West Africa till I was 7. I took an anti-malarial called Paladrin for that time during every visit back, and I've had no issues. What's happened to Paladrin?
So Paladrin, the problem with Paladrin, chloroquine proguanil, is that it is very effective in many parts of the world, but it is not effective in many parts of Africa and some other parts of the world where we have so-called falciparum malaria. And that's the problem. That's why we need to go. Depends where you're going. We would always recommend that you look at somewhere like Fit for Travel, which is the NHS website, where you can add in your country, or speak to your pharmacist. Your pharmacist is the expert. They can now give you every anti-malarial because they're not available on prescription, so you'd need to pay for them anyway.
Virginia Street in Ambergate, Derbyshire says, I took Lariam in 1995 when I went wild camping in Zimbabwe. The first night I woke up in the middle of a river. I'd been sleepwalking. I had no idea where I was. It was terrifying. I would never take Lariam again. And I don't know if Lariam is now being blamed for everything. I don't know, but...
No, the problem we've got is when we consider that, Mefloquine, very common Lariam, abnormal dreams and insomnia, that is at least 1 in 10 people getting it. It could be more often than that. Now, the depression and anxiety, they say, is common. That's between 1 in 10 and 1 in 100 people. Depression is very common and anxiety is very common in everyday life anyway. So that's where it gets a little bit more difficult.
John is in Romsey and says, I'm ex-military. In 2008, I was in a helicopter. I was a pilot in a malarial area. I was prescribed Lariam, and I can confirm it caused some pretty extreme hallucinations. At one point while taking it, I was convinced I was on top of a roof. He then says no one should take it, it's just not safe. So this is your moment, Sarah.
Okay, this is my moment to say there are alternatives, and for the vast majority of people, my understanding, I think, is that mefloquine Lariam is cheaper than some of the alternatives. My feeling is that if you've been concerned by this, speak to your pharmacist. They will tell you all the options. Do not take the risk of not taking anything.
Dr. Sarah Jarvis, Medical Monday, and the dangers of some malaria treatments. Thank you.